Oh, hey YouTube, come on, what are you doing? Get to the chopper now!
Hey guys, what up? Tominator here. In this video, we're going to be talking about the top 10 bodybuilders throughout history. So, woof, big stuff, man. This is going to be a monumental task, to say the least. Not only narrowing it down to 10, but then ordering it. That's going to be very open to interpretation. So try not to get too upset if you feel your favorite bodybuilder is too low or missed the cut entirely, because after all, this is a very selective group. Now, keep in mind I am trying to be objective, so it's not like I'm just listing my personal favorites or anything like that. But nonetheless, I am the one who put this thing together, so at the end of the day, of course there's going to be an element of subjective bias involved. That said, here's the criteria I based it on. So first and foremost, wins. We're talking about key victories at the Olympia, Arnold Classic, and total career wins at the IFBB level. Obviously, Olympia wins are weighted more heavily because that's the biggest show in bodybuilding. Next, you got to factor in their impact and lasting legacy. Like, what did they do for the sport? How popular were they? How many people did they inspire? Etc., etc. And of course, we can't forget about the physique itself. This will actually prove to be the difference maker for a couple of guys on here who may not have ever won a Sandow, but who I still feel solidly deserve a spot in the top 10. So let's get into it. Coming in at the number 10 spot, we have the myth Sergio Oliva. Sergio makes the cut because he was a three-time Olympia champion between 1967 and 1969. He had arguably the best genetics of all time. I mean, look at the guy's proportions. He's just ridiculous. He had a 28 or 29-inch waist at 235 pounds. This was actually the tightest midsection of any Mr. Olympia, even smaller than Frank Zane's. He had those wide flaring lats like a cobra hood and the best and biggest back in the business at the time. He didn't really have a weak body part. I mean, even his calves and forearms were good. The guy's triceps had insane sweep and mass and were some of the best ever, and his structure was damn near flawless for a bodybuilder. So, factor in that he allegedly didn't even diet properly and obviously didn't have access to good supplements and drugs back then. And, I mean, this guy might as well have been natural compared to today's bodybuilders, and still, look at him. So, yeah, Sergio is just a freak of nature, plain and simple. He was also one of only 3 bodybuilders to ever defeat Arnold Schwarzenegger in competition, and the only to do so at the Olympia level. So, Sergio could arguably be quite a bit higher on this list, but watch the rest of it first, and then you can be the judge. At number 9, we have the Sultan of Symmetry, Flex Wheeler. Now, I know what you're thinking. Flex at number 9? Why so low? Well, to be honest, I'm surprised to see him this low down as well. When I was putting this thing together originally, I thought he'd be a couple spots higher at least, but when you guys see the people in front of him, you might understand better. So, Flex had 4 Arnold Classic victories, which stood as the record for a long time. He was also runner-up at the Olympia 3 times, the first in 1993 to Dorian, and then once again in 98 and 99 to Ronnie. He also had 5 Olympia, or Ironman Pro victories to his name. Not quite the Olympia, but still impressive. The major reason that Flex is on this list, however, is the physique. So the guy just had incredible round muscle bellies with these tiny-ass joints. He had perfect shape, symmetry, and aesthetics. His back was also one of the best and most detailed ever, and his tight waistline and beautiful lines are really second to none. So even though he never won an Olympia, I don't see how you could not include Flex among the top 10 bodybuilders of all time. And the same goes for this next guy. Kevin Levrone takes the number 8 position. So Levrone won an impressive 23 IFBB contests, which was actually the record for a while until Ronnie broke it in 2004. And among those victories are 2 Arnold Classic titles in 94 and 96. Kevin also took second at the Olympia 4 times, and only one other bodybuilder has more runner-up finishes at the Olympia than him. And of course, just like Flex, his physique was incredible, so even though he never captured a Sandow, that's what really puts him ahead of some of the other guys who did. His triceps, shoulders, and traps were arguably the best ever, and he had a mean side chest and most muscular pose, not to mention his phenomenal posing. Coming in at number 7, we have the Blade, Dexter Jackson. Dexter currently holds the record for the most pro wins with 28 and counting. He was the one who eventually broke Flex's record of 4 Arnold Classic victories when he took his 5th in 2015. He also won 1 Olympia in 2008, and he's had 6 top 3 finishes at the Olympia as well. He also has a record-setting 17 Mr. Olympia appearances, eclipsing the former record, which I believe was held by Ronnie Coleman with 14 showings. So, needless to say, Dexter's longevity in the sport is unparalleled, and coupled with his excellent track record, it's easy to make a case for him being even higher in this list. At number 6, we have Jay Cutler. And as you probably all know, he's a 4-time Mr. O. Jay has a record-setting 6 second-place finishes at the Olympia, placing behind Ronnie Coleman 4 times before finally winning it, and then again to Dexter in 2008 and Phil in 2011. But for me, the most amazing stat when it comes to Jay is that he was top 2 at the Olympia, so a top 2 bodybuilder in the world, for 10 consecutive appearances. So first in 2001, then he skipped 2002, and then from 2003 all the way to 2011, Jay either placed first or second every year. So that's just an astounding accomplishment, and one that may never again be duplicated. Only Phil Heath has a chance of surpassing this feat if he continues to rack up a few more victories. And let's not forget his 3 Arnold Classic wins that he collected from 2002 to 2004. So yeah, some mighty impressive accolades for Jay Cutler. And fittingly, at number 5, we have Jay's successor, the Gift, Phil Heath. I consider Phil to easily be a top 5 bodybuilder of all time now that he's rattled off 6 straight Olympia wins, and still counting, because let's be honest, he doesn't look to be slowing down, and I think another 2 to 3 is pretty much guaranteed barring some major injury or accident. He also has 1 Olympia runner-up in 2010 to his friend Jay Cutler. He's never placed outside of the top 5 at the Olympia, so his worst showing was in 2009 when he took 5th, but he also got sick that year and was throwing up before the show backstage and reportedly lost about 10 pounds of muscle, so if that didn't happen, he probably would have placed at least a spot or 2 higher. And for that matter, Phil's never placed lower than 5th in his entire career across any show, so he also took 5th at one of the Arnolds, I believe it was in 2007, but that was earlier on, and for the past 6 or 7 years, he's been doing nothing but winning, so yeah. Phil is the one bodybuilder on this list who still has the chance to move up, and if he continues to win and takes even 1 more Sandow, I'll probably have to bump him ahead of this next guy. In the number 4 spot, yep, we're talking about the Shadow, Dorian Yates. So Dorian, just like Phil, was a 6-time Mr. Olympia. He was also runner-up to Lee Haney in 1991, and he had 15 victories to his name, which doesn't sound that impressive compared to the 20-plus that Levrone and Dexter stacked up, but then you gotta consider he only competed 17 times in his professional career, and he never finished less than 2nd place. So correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I've seen, that gives Dorian the highest winning percentage of any Mr. Olympia in history. Now, it's true that in his very first contest he only placed 7th, but that was over in some other organization in Britain, so let's be clear, I'm only counting IFBB contests in this video. Plus, that was back in 85 or 86, so well before Dorian started kicking ass and taking names in the 90s. So yeah, basically, the man never knew failure and did nothing but win. Truly incredible. The only reason he's not higher up is because he didn't have the longevity of the top 3 guys, such as his predecessor, Lee Haney, who comes in at number 3. Now, even a 3rd place finish for Lee might seem a bit unfair. I mean, after all, he does share the record of 8 Mr. Olympia titles with Ronnie, so at worst he should be number 2, right? Well, I'll get to that in a moment. But aside from that, Haney also had 11 IFBB Pro wins, and again, that doesn't sound that impressive at first, but considering 8 of those wins were at the Olympia, and that Haney retired prematurely when he was only 31, at an age when most Mr. Olympias these days haven't even won their first title, and it's a little bit more noteworthy, right? Especially when you consider that Haney never placed less than 3rd throughout his entire bodybuilding career. I mean, the guy very likely could have won at least 1 more Olympia in 1992 as well, before Dorian really blew up in 93. So yeah, you could definitely make a case for Haney being even higher on this list. But for my money, another guy deserves the number 2 spot even more, and that, of course, is the one and only Arnold, who many of you would already know that he's won the Olympia 7 times. He also took runner-up in 1969 to Sergio Oliva, and was only ever defeated 3 times on a bodybuilding stage. The first time was in 1966 to a guy named Chester Jordan, then in 68 to Frank Zane, and finally in 69 to Sergio. But even though Arnold had 1 less Olympia victory compared to Haney, he was also very young, and had he competed throughout the second half of the 1970s, there's no doubt in my mind that he could have easily racked up another 4 or 5 Olympias. In fact, had he kept going, I don't see anybody beating him until Samir Banu came along in 1983, so that is potentially 13 Sandows had he not gotten involved in showbiz. But disregarding the hypothetical, the reason I ultimately put him ahead of Haney is because Arnold's legacy is simply unmatched. Nobody did more for the sport or inspired more people to start lifting and sculpting their bodies. So his unparalleled impact and legendary status and all his contributions, that's why Arnold comes out ahead. Okay, so we're almost there, but before we get to number 1, let's go through a couple honorable mentions. First off, we got Sean Ray. Originally I had him at number 10, but upon reflection I had to bump him off for Sergio Oliva, because not only did Sergio have 3 Olympias under his belt, but also for his era, I think his physique was relatively more impressive than Ray's as well, even though I personally prefer the overall shape and more polished development of Sean. That said, let's talk about Sean Ray. So he had one Arnold Classic title in 1991. He could have probably had more had he competed at the event more often, since he mainly just focused on the Olympia. Speaking of which, he was runner-up there twice in 94 and 96. And he also placed in the top 5 at the Mr. O for 12 consecutive years. So this consistency was just off the charts and no one else has replicated it, not even Dexter. And also, how could you have a top 10 bodybuilders of all time without mentioning this guy, Frank Zane? So here's someone who could definitely make the list. I will admit he's the most glaring omission considering he's a 3-time Mr. Olympia, and as I already mentioned, one of only 3 men to defeat Arnold on stage, and arguably the most aesthetic bodybuilder of all time. So yeah, it was tough not to include him, but I just couldn't put him on here instead of Flex or Kevin, even though neither of them ever won an Olympia and Frank won 3. Those guys are just too far ahead physique-wise as far as I'm concerned. But if you prefer the leaner, more natural-looking, old-school physiques, then Zane is a lock for the top 10, no doubt. But for me, he doesn't quite make the cut. So finally, we come to the number 1, the greatest bodybuilder of all time, and yes, we are talking about the king, Ronnie Coleman, who, along with Lee Haney, also shares the record of 8 Mr. O's. And he also held the record for most pro wins with 26 until Dexter surpassed it recently. And he also had one Arnold Classic victory as well in 2001. So let me just justify his position and why he placed ahead of the other top guys, okay? So let's start with Haney. Even though Haney also won 8 Olympias and had a much better record than Ronnie in terms of winning percentage, Ronnie faced greater competition, especially in the late 90s, coming up against the likes of Flex Wheeler, Kevin Levrone, Nasser El-Somebody, Sean Ray, Chris Cormier, and Lee Priest. Haney never had to contend with that depth of talent. Also, Ronnie's physique in certain years like 98 and 99 and 2003 was just on another level. So even though Haney was much more consistent and didn't have as many controversial wins, I just feel like Ronnie at his best is unbeatable. So in terms of competition, the only guy who faced steeper competition than Ronnie during his reign was Dorian, because these guys I just mentioned from the 90s were unreal. But the reason Dorian doesn't place ahead is, of course, because he had 2 less Sandows compared to Big Ron. And really, it probably should have been 3 less, because that last one in 97 was a gift. So even though Dorian's track record was nearly spotless, he simply didn't have the longevity compared to guys like Ronnie or Haney. And lastly, compared to Arnold, again, Ronnie had 1 more Sandow. And like it or not, his physique would completely blow Arnold's out of the water, especially in the late 90s when his waist was still in check and he was at his most aesthetic. As I said before, had Arnold competed longer and not ventured into Hollywood so quickly, he probably could have won over 9 Olympias, in which case, yeah, we'd be having a different discussion. He probably would be the automatic number 1. But since he didn't, and given that his level of competition was much less, that's why he comes in as the runner-up. So that's the top 10 greatest bodybuilders of all time. Was there somebody you feel I missed? Would you reorder it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Until next time, guys, I'm the Tominator, signing off, and I'll be back.